Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Robin Dawkins and Gavin Parker? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, including the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. In 1988, a woman named Megs Clinton Parker lived in the area of Pietermaritzburg, South Africa. She managed a photography studio. In May 1988, she had a consensual sexual encounter with a man named Dave Lotter. They were not in a relationship with each other. Dave and Megs were both active young people who had several short-term dating experiences. Megs became pregnant as a result of her encounter with Dave, but was reluctant to tell her family members due to embarrassment. She also didn't tell Dave. Instead, Megs temporarily moved 6 hours away to Pretoria and stayed in a residential hotel. She found a job in another photography studio. On February 17, 1989, at 3:45 p.m., 27-year-old Megs gave birth to a son in the Nigel Hospital, which is located east of Johannesburg. The same day, there was only one other child born in the maternity ward of the hospital. A 26-year-old woman named Sandy Dawkins gave birth to a son. Sandy worked as a bank clerk in Johannesburg. She lived with her boyfriend Jeff, who was a handyman. Jeff had 2 children from a previous relationship. That evening, a nurse in the hospital somehow switched the 2 newborns. So, with only 2 babies in the maternity ward, the nurse could not keep them straight. Sandy Dawkins returned to the outskirts of Johannesburg where she lived and raised the biological son of Megs. The son was named Robin. Sandy was poor, and Robin grew up without the finer things in life. Megs Clinton Parker returned to her home in Pietermaritzburg, 5.5 hours away from Johannesburg. She raised Gavin, Sandy's biological son, in a financially secure environment. Gavin had many opportunities that Robin did not have. Both Sandy and Megs thought that they were raising their own children. They had no idea that the children had been switched at the hospital. A few months after giving birth, Megs Clinton Parker told Dave Lotter that he was Gavin's father. Dave already had 2 children that he was supposed to be supporting and was not in the market for additional financial responsibilities at this time. He didn't want anything to do with Gavin. Megs was fine with this at first, but then she ran into some financial problems. She was looking for a job and did not predict having money difficulties in the long term. She was just looking for Dave to provide temporary child support. Dave Lotter was still not on board with the concept of taking accountability. He insisted that Gavin was not his. Megs was not pleased with Dave's denial. She hired an attorney, filed a lawsuit, and forced Dave to take a paternity test. The result from the testing was quite surprising. Dave was not Gavin's father, and Megs was not Gavin's mother. Megs was quite certain that she had been pregnant and had given birth, so this news was disconcerting and confusing. Everyone involved soon realized that her son must have been switched at the hospital. Her lawyers investigated and found out that only one other child was born at Nigel Hospital on February 17, 1989. The hospital called Sandy Dawkins and asked her to bring her son Robin in for some tests. She was told that Robin might have been switched at birth. At this point, Sandy had recently split up with Jeff, and she was pregnant with her second child. In December of 1990, test results proved that there had, in fact, been a switch. Gavin was Sandy's biological child, and Robin belonged to Megs. This was a very unusual situation. No one really knew what to do. The women and their sons met several times, despite living 5.5 hours apart. They were on friendly terms, but there were a lot of conflicting emotions. Sandy and Megs had a major dilemma. What should they do about the whole switched at birth problem? They only had 2 options. The first option was that they could formally adopt the child who they had been given at the hospital. So Sandy could adopt Robin, and Megs could adopt Gavin. This would keep things as they were. However, option 1 was inconsistent with the biological reality. The second option was to switch the children back. So Sandy would end up with her biological son Gavin, and Megs would end up with her biological son Robin. Option 2 would respect the biological component, but break the bonds that had formed between the mothers and sons. By this time, mental health clinicians, lawyers, and the courts were involved in the situation. Everybody agreed that if either mother wanted her biological son to be returned, the government would support and enforce that decision. In order to keep everything the way it was, both mothers would have to agree. Option 1 required a consensus. In order to switch back, option 2, only one mother needed to make that decision. Many mental health clinicians did not really know what to make of the situation because it was so rare. The scientific literature wasn't any help either. It wasn't like they were going to find a dozen articles on what to do after children were switched at birth. Hospitals did not regularly display this level of negligence. There were a variety of feelings being expressed by clinicians, but pretty much everybody agreed on one point. If a switch was going to happen, it needed to happen before the children reached the age of 2.5. Ultimately, both Sandy and Megs decided not to switch the children back. They each chose to keep the son who they were given at the hospital. The women filed a lawsuit against the government, knowing that the probability of winning anything meaningful was low. The trial took place in 1995. Mental health clinicians testified that both Sandy and Megs had symptoms of depression and anxiety due to the mistake made at the hospital. Ultimately, the women prevailed in the lawsuit. Sandy was awarded $50,000 and Megs was awarded $43,000. Considering the expenses that the women had incurred, like from traveling hours to see their biological sons, it was a very small financial award. They would have been better off financially if they had switched the children back. Robin and Gavin knew about their complex situation growing up. They were aware about the mix-up at the hospital. Sandy and Megs were completely transparent about what happened. Robin and Gavin visited each other and were friends. For a while, things seemed to be working out okay, although there was some tension. Robin was happy to leave home to see his biological mother, Megs, but Gavin was reluctant to visit his biological mother, Sandy, on his own. Gavin was quite happy with the way things worked out. As a teenager, Robin grew to resent his situation. He felt as though Gavin was better off. Robin wanted to be with Megs. He wanted to live the life that he was supposed to live based on biology. At the age of 15, Robin moved in with Megs and Gavin. During an interview about the situation, Megs said, quote, "I'm glad I won," unquote. Despite this incredible victory over Sandy, Megs and Robin did not get along. Megs argued with Robin because he was not a fan of school. Robin dropped out of school at the age of 18 and moved to a town far away. He worked on vehicles for a living. Eventually, Robin found a love interest and had children of his own. He returned to Megs along with his young family. Megs was once again restored to a position of victory. She had both Sandy's biological son Gavin as well as her own biological son Robin. Megs was happy with the way things worked out. Sandy felt differently about the situation. She regretted the decision not to switch the boys back to their biological mothers. Ultimately, Sandy lost everyone. Now moving to my analysis. Leading up to the civil case against the government in 1995, Megs and Sandy had different feelings. They were assessed by mental health clinicians as part of the lawsuit. Here are some of the feelings and symptoms they experienced during this time. Megs was obsessed about both boys. She wanted to keep Gavin because she had bonded to him, but she also worried about Robin all the time. According to a mental health professional who interviewed Megs, she, quote, fantasized that Sandy would die and she would be given both children, unquote. Megs did not remember saying this, but it's clear either way that there was tension between the two women. One of the most prominent symptoms that Megs suffered from was weight gain. This appeared to be a problem for a long time. Megs reported feeling powerless and had symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. She was concerned about how Robin would feel in the future. Would he be upset because she left him in Sandy's care? Megs was so upset that one night she had a few glasses of wine and drove her motor vehicle with Gavin in the back seat. She tried to light a cigarette while driving and smashed into a fire hydrant. At this point, Megs was smoking about 40 cigarettes a day. There's something ironic about a person smoking that much and driving into a fire hydrant, almost like her vehicle is trying to save itself from smoke or fire damage. Sandy had a lot of powerful and painful feelings as well. She felt confused, vulnerable, and believed that she had encountered a problem that could not be solved. She was attached to Robin, but also curious about what was happening with Gavin. Sandy was angry at Megs and to some degree blamed her for the hospital mix-up. Sandy was upset that Megs came all the way to that particular hospital just to avoid embarrassment. Again, Megs visited that hospital to prevent people from knowing that she was pregnant. I guess that plan backfired. Sandy wished that Megs would simply disappear. Reportedly, Sandy had trouble sleeping and went through a phase of excessive alcohol consumption. She felt as though Megs was judging her for the way that she was raising Robin, almost like Sandy wasn't good enough. She could not do anything right. Moving to the next question, what would have been the best decision in this case? One mental health professional summarized the dilemma pretty well by saying each mother was the biological parent of one child and the psychological parent of the other. This was certainly a challenging situation that did not have an easy answer. As I mentioned, the women were confronted with two choices: adopt the children or switch them back. Each decision came with risks and benefits. For example, switching back would have made things easier as far as legal ramifications. Each mother would have been with her biological son. It would have also made the family tree less complex. Considering that Robin and Gavin were about 20 months old when the hospital mistake was discovered, they would have forgotten everything that happened prior to being switched back. Of course, there would still be trauma, but they wouldn't remember it. The main argument against switching the children back was how hard the experience would be for the mothers. With all this in mind, here are my thoughts on what the best decision would have been. This case has been presented as an impossible choice, like there was no suitable answer. It was a puzzle with no solution. There is no doubt that it was a challenging situation, but I think one course of action stands out as more reasonable than the other. In my opinion, the best decision was to switch the children back. Considering their age, Robin and Gavin would have been fine. Sandy and Megs, on the other hand, would have suffered quite a bit, but I think this was inevitable. They would have suffered with either decision. If the hospital switch had been discovered much later, like when the boys were 12 years old or 15 years old, that would have been a completely different situation. In that case, not switching would have probably made more sense. I think Sandy and Megs were put in a terrible spot, but discovering the hospital mix-up so early actually gave them an opportunity to repair most of the damage. The pain suffered by the women almost certainly played a part in their decision. If they were magically immune from any painful feelings, I think they would have made a different decision. They would have switched the boys. Put another way, if the decision was only about the welfare of the children, the correct decision becomes obvious. Now moving to my final thoughts. Regardless of what may or may not have been the right decision in this case, the behavior of the women was understandable. Again, they were in a tough position. Each mother would have preferred to have both children, and Megs ended up achieving this goal. I think this was mostly due to her having more resources than Sandy. Ultimately, it was money that obtained her the victory. The power of biology may be undeniable, but the power of money is unassailable. Those are my thoughts in the case of Robin Dawkins and Gavin Parker. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.